My husband's dream girl posted on Instagram. God, please help me find a burly caring man. Seeing this, my husband left his mother alone in the mall. His mother, namely my mother-in-law, had just come downtown from the countryside and didn't know how to take the escalator, so she accidentally put her foot into the gap of the escalator. I rushed to the hospital after receiving the news that my mother-in-law had injured an artery in the accident and was bleeding heavily. She needed amputation to save her life. I urged her to have surgery immediately. However, she was frightened by such treatment and flatly refused to undergo surgery. Where's my son? How dare you wicked woman want to chop off my leg? I'll never have the surgery unless my son comes. I called my husband more than a dozen times, only to hear a sweet female voice. When I finally got through, "Hello, your husband is showing me his biceps with a barbell in his hands he might even perform breaking a rock with. His pecs later," I interrupted her angrily, "hurry up and get him to the phone. Mom had an accident and rejects surgery unless she sees him." Nathan Cooper chimed in coldly, "Your mother had an accident, but does it have anything to do with me?" He ruthlessly hung up on me. When I called again, his phone was already powered off. Soon, my mother-in-law died because of the delay in treatment. 3 days later, Nathan returned home. He didn't remember to ask about his mother until he felt the room empty. "Where's my mom?" I replied in a cold voice in the portrait on the wall. One to celebrate his mother's 60th birthday, my husband brought her from the countryside and took her shopping in the mall. Unexpectedly, Nathan saw a post from his dream girl, Antonia Samuels. God, please help me find a burly caring man. Nathan thought this was a rare opportunity for him, so he left his mother alone in the mall and hurried to see Antonia without hesitation. It was the first time my mother-in-law had ever come downtown from the countryside, so she didn't know how to take the escalator in the right way and accidentally put her foot into its gap in a daze when going downstairs. As a result, a serious accident occurred. I took leave and rushed to the hospital immediately after learning about this. I saw my mother-in-law lying on the hospital bed with a pale face and an extremely frightened look. "Go away, all of you. Where's my son? Tell him to come back." The doctor pulled me aside and explained to me in a serious tone how severe my mother-in-law's injuries were. The injured requires amputation without delay if we want to save her life. But she is adverse to the approach of medical staff. We need her family members to persuade her as soon as possible. If we delay any further, I'm afraid it may be too late, and her life may be in danger then. My dad was also a doctor, so I knew the scientific rigor of doctors. Only by listening to the doctor could one minimize the harm. Without any hesitation, I ran into the ward at once to comfort my mother-in-law and urge her to immediately undergo surgery. When my mother-in-law saw me, however, she just flared at me. "You wicked woman want to chop off my legs. You are in cahoots with them against me. Where's my son? I want to see him. If my son doesn't come, don't ever think you can trick me into having any surgery." My mother-in-law was very resistant to the surgery treatment. She still insisted that she wouldn't undergo it, and she should see her son Nathan even though her leg and foot were already bleeding heavily. She persisted in rejecting the operation unless her son was present. With no other way, I could only call my husband frantically. After more than a dozen missed calls, Nathan finally answered. A leisurely and soft female voice came from the other end of the line before I could utter anxiously, "Hello, your husband is showing me his biceps with a barbell in his hands. He might even perform breaking a rock with his pecs later." There was even a giggle as she spoke. Amid her voice, I could also hear a man's heavy breathing. "Tony, who's calling?" I froze. It was Nathan's voice. Nathan had promised to take his mother to shop at the mall for clothes to wear at her birthday celebration. But his mother had ended up wandering around the mall alone and accidentally getting into an accident. I had thought that he was occupied with something urgent and unshirkable. Out of all my expectations, he had just gone to hang out with Antonia. At the thought of this, I raged. "Mom got into an accident and doesn't agree to surgery unless she sees you." Halfway through my demand that he should come to the hospital right away, I heard a snorting laugh from the other end of the line. Then, Nathan's cold voice came. "Your mother had an accident, but does it have anything to do with me?" Just as I wanted to say something else, Nathan had already become extremely impatient. "Jane Fenn, I'm busy with something important right now. You'd better stop bothering me. Just wait until I get home if you have anything to say." He ruthlessly hung up on me. When I called again, his phone was already powered off. I was in deep anxiety like a cat on hot bricks. Just when I was trying to figure out how to find Nathan, I suddenly received a call from the hospital. "Mrs. Cooper, your mother-in-law is at her last gasp. Come and see her for the last time." I felt my heart skipped a beat. I rushed to the hospital immediately. My mother-in-law was ashen and bloodless. She lay on the hospital bed, lonely, still murmuring her son's name. Nat, Nat. Although I was not close to my mother-in-law at all, I couldn't help but tear up at the sight of this and step forward to hold her hand. Mom, I'm sorry. I failed to let Nathan come. My mother-in-law glared at me. You must have hidden my son. Before she could finish her words, in a fit of rage, she suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood and soon died. I had mixed feelings. Until the last moment of her life, my mother-in-law still thought that her son was a dutiful one and that he didn't come because I deliberately stopped him. In truth, however, Nathan was keeping his dream girl company, eagerly simping over her. I made up my mind the moment my mother-in-law breathed her last. I took out my phone and sent a message to Nathan. Let's get a divorce. The hospital had limited space, so I was informed that I should take my mother-in-law's body back. I still couldn't get through to Nathan, so I handled my mother-in-law's funeral alone and chose a good graveyard for her with fatigue. After 3 sleepless days, I finally managed to finish everything. I printed out a divorce agreement and curled up on the sofa, waiting for Nathan to come back. I had just fallen asleep when I heard the sound of the door being unlocked outside. Nathan was back. As soon as he walked in, he smelled of strong perfume. Jen, cook me some spaghetti. I'm hungry. Nathan habitually left an order before he took off his coat and went to take a shower. He always liked to order me around like this. Considering that he was busy at work, one often helped him with whatever he needed. But I didn't move this time. When he finished his shower and came out wrapped in a bath towel, he immediately frowned after a subconscious glance at the empty dining table. Jane Fenn, where's the spaghetti? I knew he was going to get mad whenever he called me by my full name. I used to believe that a harmonious relationship required some compromises, even if I had to sacrifice myself. That was why he had become the way he was now. But now I was tired. Go make what you want to eat yourself. I didn't have the energy. I could hear my voice was frigid and emotionless. Nathan was stunned, looking at me silently in his bathrobe. I slightly propped myself up and picked up the divorce agreement from the coffee table. It's been 3 days. You should have read my message. Sign it when you have time, and we'll go through the divorce procedures. Nathan cast a cold glance at the divorce agreement. Then, he uttered a snorting laugh. Jane Fenn, when did you learn to play hard to get? He sounded like he was often treated this way by someone else. I gave him no reply and didn't bother to ask him anything. After all, we would soon become strangers. We are solid. Why do we need a divorce? Faced with my silence, Nathan softened his tone slightly. He sat down next to me on the couch and tried to comfort me. I was busy with something important when you called me a few days ago. That's why I sounded a little impatient with you. I'm sorry, honey. I looked up at him coldly and asked flatly, so, is showing Antonia Samuels how to break a rock with your pecs what you call an important matter? Nathan was rendered speechless for a while. Instead of explaining, he tried to change the topic. Tony and I are just ordinary friends. As for you, I saw you get into your boss car 2 days ago, yet you still told me nothing was going on between you and him. As he spoke, he picked up the divorce agreement and tore it to pieces. Why are you in such a hurry to divorce me? Are you so eager to get rid of me and be with your boss? I was so angry that I slapped him. It's you who have no idea how to keep your distance from others, yet now you are still trying to pass the buck, aren't you? It was raining heavily that day and I couldn't get a cab anywhere. You promised to pick me up, but you were nowhere to be found even after I waited at the downstairs of my office building for 2 hours. The boss gave me a ride just because he felt sorry for me. My eyes turned misty. It had been raining heavily that day, but Nathan had stood me up because of a phone call. A call from Antonia. She had complained that she was eager for spaghetti but without anyone to keep her company. Immediately after Nathan heard this, he had asked her where she was and had left me waiting in the heavy rain, going to eat spaghetti with her. I didn't know how he had the nerve to accuse me now. Hearing what I said, Nathan came to his senses, at a loss for what to do. I'm sorry, honey. I didn't know. He came forward intending to wipe my tears but was pushed away by me. It doesn't matter that you tore up the divorce agreement. I'll go and make a new copy. Anyway, I must divorce you. I stood up coldly and walked toward the study. When I came out with another copy of the divorce agreement, I saw Nathan searching throughout every bedroom in the house. Standing in the living room, he asked, Jen, where is my mom? I couldn't help but laugh coldly in my heart. How bovine he was. I couldn't believe he didn't notice that his mother was missing until now, but it had already been such a long time since he returned home. My mother-in-law's suitcase still lay unopened in the guest bedroom, and the specialties she had brought from the countryside were still in the refrigerator. But she was gone. I stared at Nathan without saying a word. He just kept talking to himself. Is my mom mad at me? I admit that it was fault for leaving her alone at the mall that day. But it was a special case at that time. I had no other choice. Jen, can you let my mom come back? I'll apologize to her. Nathan walked toward me slowly, his voice almost pleading. I searched the whole house but didn't find Mom. Tell me, where on earth did she go? I turned to look at the memorial portrait hanging on the wall on the balcony side. I pointed at it and said, in the portrait on the wall. Nathan was stunned. He followed my gaze toward the balcony. The instant he saw the memorial portrait, he knitted his brows tightly. Nathan strode over, roughly dragged down the portrait of my mother-in-law from the wall, and furiously threw it to the ground, smashing it to pieces. Jane, I know you are mad at me, but you LO15 don't have to play such a prank on my mother, do you? My mother is alive and well. What do you mean by putting a memorial portrait here? Do you want my mother to die so much? I watched helplessly as the only portrait of my mother-in-law was smashed to pieces. There was water splashed on her face in the photo. It just seemed like she was shedding tears. I was silent for a long while before I slowly looked up. Nathan Cooper, you were the one who took your mother out. She's your mother, not mine, yet you can't even be bothered to take good care of her, and just came to ask me about her. I haven't slept for 3 days. Why do you think I know where your mother is? Don't you claim to be a dutiful son? Go find her yourself then. Hearing my firm and flat tone, Nathan gazed at me in a daze. Jane, what's your problem? Why are you so irritable today? I couldn't help laughing coldly. Normally, he was allowed to throw a tantrum at will, point at my nose, order me around bossily, stay out all night with his dream girl, and come back to tell me that they were just ordinary friends. Now I was just telling the truth without any abuse, but I got criticized for having a problem. I was accused of irritability. What a double standard. I didn't reply to him. I just turned around, picked up the pen, and signed my name on the divorce agreement without further ado. Then, I walked into the bedroom, packed my stuff, and prepared to leave with my baggage. I only left a few sentences before leaving. I've already signed the divorce agreement. I suggest you sign it as soon as possible. Go through the divorce procedures with me when you have time. If you are really so busy, that's fine. I'll file for divorce. No matter what you say, we must divorce. With that, I left without looking back. However, angrily Nathan shouted my name behind me. I checked into a small hotel that only cost $60 a night with my suitcase. I had moved out in a hurry, but I didn't plan to rent a house. I was considering applying for a post at my company's headquarters after I put my mother-in-law's affairs in order and completed the divorce procedures. Then, I would get away from here and start a new life in Aqua, a seaside city where the headquarters was located. The night I finished dealing with my mother-in-law's affairs, I texted Nathan. Your mom was buried in St. Maria graveyard. Go take a look at her. Anyway, I had delivered the message, whether he believed it or not. The next day, I hesitated for a long while but finally decided to lay a wreath on my mother-in-law's grave. No matter what, her son and I were about to get divorced, so it was my final farewell to her. I had just placed the flowers on her grave when I looked up and saw a familiar couple. It was Nathan and a girl who dressed up gorgeously by his side, holding a white puppy in her arms. Nat, do you think our dog would dislike being buried here? What if he gets bullied by the deceased buried here? Don't worry. I'll dig the grave for him myself and put some herbs there to keep the ghosts away from him. Nathan comforted Antonia with a gentle smile. As I looked up, Nathan noticed me and immediately furrowed his brow. Jane Fenn, you're going too far. You not only play the trick of running away from home but also stalk me. His loud accusations attracted many passers-by to Rubberneck. I didn't want to cause any trouble, but just as I turned around and was about to leave, Antonia stopped me. You might also like 7. I've seen you before. I think your name is Jane Fenn, isn't it? You're Nat's wife, right? Antonia's eyes and brows were curved into sweet arcs when she smiled, making her beautiful girl in men's dreams. No wonder Nathan was so obsessed with her that he would rather keep her company than be with his mother. I uttered in a distant voice, I will no longer be very soon. Antonia didn't care in the slightest about the indifference in my tone. She just stretched her neck to glance at the grave behind me and asked with a smile, I think you're here to pay your respects to an elder buried here. Is that your mother's grave? I sneered, no, it's my mother-in-law. Antonia turned to look at Nathan in surprise and asked, is your mother dead? Why haven't you told me about it? Nathan clenched his fist and slapped me hard. He growled at me coldly, Jane Fenn, enough. Your joke is way out of line. Why do you just not know when to stop? An intense feeling of powerlessness filled my heart. I couldn't be bothered to explain because he just wouldn't believe me anyway. Expressionless, I said, "You have the contact information of the doctors at the hospital. Why don't you call them and ask about your mother's condition? Then, you'll know." Nathan let out a cold laugh. He took out his phone and snapped, "Jane, since you are so shameless, I might as well play this act with you to the end. Let's see how you'll end up." The call was soon connected. Nathan curved his lips into a cold and smug smile. He asked the doctor on the other end of the phone, "Dr. Jackson, Jane said my mother was hospitalized in your hospital a few days ago. Did she tell you to put on an act with you to fool me?" Nathan had a sinister yet expectant look on his face. He seemed to be waiting for me to be exposed. But to his surprise, he just heard a heavy and solemn sigh from the other end of the line. "Nathan, why do you call me so late? On the day your mother had an accident, I frantically called you over 20 times, but you never answered. Where were you? Your mother passed away a week ago." Nathan was dumbfounded. He was pale, his hand holding the phone shaking uncontrollably. "What did you say?" Dr. Jackson on the phone also sounded surprised, unable to understand Nathan's shock. "Nathan, what's wrong with you? Your wife kept calling you that day. How busy were you that you couldn't even care about your wife and mother? Your mother had an accident on the escalator. She was still alive when she was taken to the hospital by ambulance, but she insisted that she would not agree to the surgery before seeing you. Where were you at that time?" Dr. Jackson questioned Nathan. Nathan was ashen-faced and opened his mouth, but couldn't utter a single word. "How did it turn out this way?" he muttered to himself, looking at me pleadingly and sadly. "Jen, such a terrible thing happened to my mother, but why didn't you tell me?" I stood by with my arms folded and watched coldly. How ridiculous his words were. "Check out your phone yourself. How many times have I called you these days? Did you ever answer? I've told you the truth several times, but you always thought I was lying and even suspected I stalked you. Did you ever believe me?" Nathan Cooper, ask yourself, is it something a man would do to leave your mother alone in the mall and hang around with another woman? Nathan was rendered speechless by my questions. "You are fully responsible for your mother's death." I said my last sentence coldly, turned around and left with my belongings. "Jen," Nathan called my name from behind, but I didn't bother to give any response. I walked away from his sight with steely determination. My application for the transfer of my post had been approved by the headquarters yesterday. If nothing went wrong, I would pack up and go to Aquav in 3 days. The scenery there was picturesque, and I could see the sea as soon as I walked out of my place. I believed that in Aquav, I would forget Nathan, forget his betrayal and all the disappointments he had brought me, and start a brand new life. But I had never expected that it was Nathan's turn to bombard me with phone calls and messages now. Just as I picked up my phone after work, I saw over a dozen missed calls. I immediately blocked and deleted him. Before I was transferred to another post, the company gave me 3 days off. I made full use of the 3-day holiday by going to a movie, eating at my favorite restaurant, and watching a concert alone. It was the first time I realized that doing things all by myself could be so fulfilling. In the marriage during these several years, I seemed to have subconsciously tied myself to Nathan. Back in college, he would always stay by my side and stand by me even in difficult situations. I had thought that his love for me would exist eternally. I had believed that our relationship would still be the same as before and would never deteriorate after we got married. But I was wrong. Pi Epsilon calls Theta. I had overestimated human nature. Nathan had been attached to Antonia for the past 2 years. It had begun on the day I had a fight with Nathan and gave him the silent treatment. Angry and bored with me, he had gone out and soon encountered Antonia, who was exactly like the girl in his dreams. DCDL, she was lively and cheerful, young and beautiful, with a well-proportioned figure. She had immediately caught Nathan's eye. Moreover, Antonia was such a flirt and a master manipulator of men that Nathan had become an eager simp for her. I couldn't learn her tricks. However, I had never blamed Antonia, for it takes two to tango. If it weren't for the change in Nathan's affection, the other woman would never be allowed the chance to come between us. The death of my mother-in-law was just a trigger that allowed me to see Nathan's true colors. Now that he could even neglect his mother for the sake of his dream girl, how could I possibly hand over my future and life to him with trust, let alone take the risk of having a child for him and being tied to him for the rest of my life? When I saw Nathan again, he had become much thinner, almost to the point of emaciation. He looked haggard with his gray face and strands of white hair. He called me in a hoarse voice. "Jen." I stopped and turned around slowly. Nathan's eyes were filled with sadness. "Honey, now I know I was wrong. I was so ignorant as to disregard the perfect marriage I was blessed with and pursue the so-called novelty and excitement. I've completely cut off contact with Antonia and will never see her again. Jen, my mother has passed away, so you are the only one I have now. Me could hardly suppress the urge to give him a laugh. I had long seen through his hypocrisy under the camouflage of his fake devotion to me. Nathan, do you know why I determined to divorce you? He shook his head. I said lightly, I called you at the hospital and told you to come to the hospital as soon as possible since Mom got into an accident. At that time, you didn't know whose mom it was and inferred with preconceived ideas from my anxious voice that it was my mother. Then, you said something that I will never forget. You said, your mother had an accident, but does it have anything to do with me? Nathan stiffened all over with panic on his face. He quickly took 2 steps forward to stop me. Jen, I didn't mean it. I just blurted it out. I never meant that way. Don't take it to heart. ID looked at him indifferently without saying a word. Athmgo IOW, I was well aware that all the so-called unintentional mistakes and blurted out words were premeditatedly speaking his mind. Whenever my family needed help, Nathan would make excuses, saying that he was busy with important meetings or urgent business. Tech off at it, I had always treated him as part of my family and showed him all my that TOU consideration. However, I had come to realize his true hearts when he said those unintentional words to me. Deep down, he never considered me one of his family. Hence, I had the right to never forgive him. Nathan still wanted to say something when his phone suddenly rang. He fumbled out his phone impatiently. With just a casual glance, I saw the contact was Tony. Nathan hurriedly pressed the button to reject the call with evasive eyes. Honey, it's a nuisance call. Pay no attention to it, I sneered. Your dream girl seldom takes the initiative to call you, but why did you reject her call? Aren't you afraid that she will get angry and you won't be able to calm her? Sensing a hint of sarcasm in my tone, Nathan instantly turned a little pale. He opened his mouth in an attempt to explain. I said with a mocking smile, Nathan, see, this is you. So hypocritical. And so degenerate. After saying these words, I turned around and left. Nathan was reluctant to sign the divorce agreement. Instead of urging him, I directly filed for divorce against him. The grounds for divorce I gave was that he had cheated on me and indirectly killed my mother-in-law, causing the complete breakdown of our relationship. The divorce lawsuit against an unfaithful partner was easy to win. Furthermore, the attorney I hired had never lost a case and hated cheating men the most. After everything was settled, I headed to my company's headquarters in Aquav with all my savings. Without the burden of marriage, I allowed more time and energy to devote to my work. Although I was new to the headquarters, I was praised constantly by my superiors and was promoted rapidly. My salary increased 3 times in half a year, with a huge increase in my bonus. For the first time, I felt how joyful it was to gain a sense of accomplishment from work. It felt much better than being in love. From time to time, when I sat by the sea to relax, I would think of my past life with Nathan. At that time, he was not so hypocritical. He was still brave and ambitious, vowing to protect me eternally. I had always stood by him even when his family was in the hospital during his most lonely and helpless time. We had both thought we would never be afraid of anything ahead of us since we had been through so many hardships together. However, eventually, we had failed to endure the impatience and boredom that had grown in our ordinary life. Perhaps the idea of spending the rest of my life with someone else was wrong from the beginning. My salary grew several times, giving me more time, energy, and confidence to pay more attention to my dressing and makeup. In my spare time, I would work out in the gym and practice yoga, so I was getting better and better in both figure and poise. Many male colleagues in the company pursued me, but I just politely declined with a smile all the time. One time when I was on a business trip, I went shopping for a bag but ran into an old acquaintance, Antonia, in the mall. She spent money lavishly, holding the arm of another man that was unfamiliar to me. When she looked up and saw me, she smiled at me. What a coincidence, I heard that you divorced Nat. Looks like you are having a good life now without him. A beauty was always adorable. Despite her ambiguous relationship with Nathan before, I bore her no grudge. I turned to look at the man behind her who was paying and asked her, "Is this your new boyfriend?" Antonia smiled with her eyes and brows curved. Him. Just another simp like Nathan. Antonia came over and whispered to me. I couldn't help but chuckle. Antonia was such a special girl with a peculiar style. Antonia suggested taking a walk with me. I didn't refuse. Looking at the passers-by coming and going on the road, I uttered with a faint smile, I thought you would still be with him. After all, Nathan was such a persistent chaser of Antonia, and she had never rejected his courtship. Antonia acted as if she had heard a funny joke. Jane, do you think everyone is as silly as you? For a man like him, girls only need to play with him. How can you genuinely get involved with him? I turned to look at her in surprise. but Antonia opened up and shared with me her trick of flirting with men without reservation. For a man like Nathan, I can see through him with only one glance. He seems faithful, but in reality, he has a wandering eye. To tell you the truth, I've seen you a long time ago. At that time, Nathan was by your side shopping with you. He paid no attention to you and just kept looking at the beautiful girls on his phone. But you still had no idea that this man beside you had already betrayed you. Antonia's words shocked me even more. I stared at her in a daze, and soon, she did say what I had guessed. So you should thank me. I deliberately kept Nathan hanging so that you could see his true colors and divorce him. It dawned on me. Holding a glass of drink in her hand, Antonia looked at me with a hearty smile and curved eyes. I smiled too. Antonia had never made things difficult for me but just called Nathan away whenever he was with me. He would accompany her to either eat spaghetti or go shopping. Or he would show her his biceps and pecs in the gym. To begin with, I had just felt angry and betrayed. But I had never expected it to turn out to be Antonia's warning out of kindness. As for a hypocrite like Nathan, you would see his true colors sooner or later. I deliberately set a little trap by posting on Instagram, and he just eagerly walked straight in. Jen, people change. Don't have too much hope for others, for humanity is fragile. Unexpectedly, I became friends with Antonia. Originally, she was on a trip to Aqua. After staying for a few days, she found that she had grown fond of this city and decided to move here. Knowing that she had moved to Aqua, Nathan had been badgering her relentlessly. He had sold his house and followed her to Aqua. Just when I arrived at the cafe where Antonia had invited me to have coffee together, I happened to run into Nathan pestering her. Antonia, I sold my house for you. You can't break up with me. Besides, I divorced my wife for you. How could you dump me? I know you like a burly, caring guy like me. I know you like to see my muscles. I can show you whenever you feel like taking a look. Antonia folded her arms. She sneered. Nathan, have you no shame? You said I dumped you, but have I ever gotten together with you? I stood by and eyed Nathan nonchalantly. At this moment, he was hideous. His gentlemanly grace had vanished into thin air. The present Nathan was also far from my impression of him. I even found it hard to understand how the vigorous gentle boy he used to be had become what he was now. A man wouldn't degenerate in an instant. Perhaps beneath his shining surface, his soul had long since begun to decay. It was just that I hadn't noticed it before. Nathan seemed to snap. Regardless of the countless people on the street, he started to feel Antonia up in public. Antonia Samuels. You bitch. I squandered so much money on you, yet now you want to get rid of me. In your dreams. I've been chasing you for so long, but I haven't even been allowed to touch your hand. Antonia struggled frantically. Nathan Cooper, go away. As a strongman, Nathan had much greater strength than a slender girl like Antonia. Nathan restrained Antonia with great force, making her unable to move at all. He curved his lips into a lascivious smile. I'm going to. Before he could finish his words, he fell to the ground with a grunt. I was still in fright with a stick in my hand. This was the first time I had hit someone so hard. I helped Antonia up. Run. Antonia was still at a loss, frightened. She grabbed her bag and ran away with me. As soon as Nathan regained consciousness, he chased after us like crazy. He was stunned at the sight of me. Jen, why are you here? The last thing I wanted was to have anything to do with him. However, sadness and regret instantly appeared on his face. Jen, I couldn't find you anywhere. It turns out that you've come to Aqua. He seemed to have forgotten what he was doing here. I clenched the stick in my hand. Nathan Cooper, I'm warning you, stay away from us. Or don't blame us for being rude to you. Nathan probably had never expected me to become friends with Antonia. Later, Nathan pretended to let us go, but in fact, he was stalking us. I thought Antonia and I were safe. Unexpectedly, Nathan held Antonia in a secluded alley after she turned around and left. When I received Antonia's call for help, I ran toward where she was without hesitation. Antonia was tied up. Nathan was trying to strip Antonia. She was so furious and ashamed that her face turned red. She cursed loudly, Nathan Cooper, you beast. I checked the time on my phone. The police I had called before I arrived had told me it would take them another 10 minutes to arrive. I had to stall for another 10 minutes. I rushed over. Nathan Cooper, stay away from her. If you have any grudge, vent it on me. He was my ex-husband after all. Even if he intended to do something, I must protect Antonia's safety. I used to think she was a mistress who didn't know how to keep her distance from a married man, but after getting to know her, I realized she was an adorable and kind girl. Besides, she had gotten into trouble with Nathan because of me. Let her go. Take me. Antonia looked at me in astonishment with tears in her eyes and kept shaking her head. but I had already made my decision. Nathan suddenly laughed. Jen, you are already my woman. There is nothing new about you. Antonia has been toying with me. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't have divorced Edia. I have to teach her a lesson today. I deliberately talked a lot to buy time until the police rushed in and pinned Nathan down. It wasn't until then that he was aware of my delaying tactic. He pointed at us and cursed in rage, "You two are in cahoots against me." But before he could rage anything else, he was taken away by the police. I quickly untied the ropes on Antonia. She wrapped her arms around me and cried loudly, "Men are so dangerous, boo-hoo, I'll never touch a man again." I patted her back gently to comfort her. "Don't be afraid. Just stay away from such people in the future." A few days later, Antonia sent me a message telling me she had found a decent job and would earn her own living. Jen, if you hadn't helped me that day, who knows what I would have become now. I think you are awesome and a competent woman. I want to have my own career like you. I'll never flirt with any men relying on my beauty again. Those useless men are not worth my time and energy at all. Reading this, I smiled with relief. I replied to her, that's how it should be. In this big world, we only have ourselves to rely on. After all, no prop can last forever. Men are even more unreliable. Life is unpredictable, and so are people's hearts. What's more, love and marriage are just as small part of life. We still have to find a goal in life and keep the initiative firmly in our hands. At the thought of this, I sent another message to Antonia. I have good news to share with you. My superiors are considering promoting me to vice president next month based on my outstanding performance. I'll treat you to a meal to celebrate then. Antonia soon replied, "Sure, I'd like to have a fondue." I put down my phone with satisfaction and turned to look out of the window. It was raining outside. The rain splashed against the window as if painting on it. Pedestrians were passing by downstairs, performing various aspects of life. But I suddenly felt life seemed to have just begun from this moment. The end.